The Kings officially have their new man. Scott Perry is announced and introduced to us media in Sacramento today as the new general manager of the Sacramento Kings. All of that and more as we dive deep today on the Jeremiah Salmonson Show. Welcome to the Jeremiah Salmonson Show. I am Jeremiah Salmonson. Thank you for being here. Today we're talking about Scott Perry being announced as the new Sacramento Kings GM, hired by Vivek Ranadive, the obviously owner and chairman of the Sacramento Kings. And today we spoke with Scott as he had his introductory press conference in Sacramento at the Golden One Center in the main press conference room. It was an interesting situation, a packed house in Sacramento in the press conference room for this announcement. You had everyone from the news radio, local beat writers and beat journalists like myself there. And we all just got an opportunity to ask Scott questions. Scott came into this event very optimistic with a kind of an air, I think, of cool, calm, and collected, I guess would be a good way to describe it, which for the Sacramento Kings is a good sight to see, something that is encouraging for the Kings. And, there's been so much this season and these past couple seasons mired with the Kings and kind of, the fan base in despair and, feeling like there's no path forward. And after certain trades and acquisitions, feeling like you've given up your future and mortgaged that, and the loss of De'Aaron Fox, the firing of Mike Brown, all of those things kind of leading towards this feeling around the organization. And Scott came in to this press conference and I think really just kind of was almost a deep breath of fresh air for this Kings organization. No Vivek Ranadive at the press conference. I think that's something I think stood out to a lot of us in the press corps. It just no sighting from Vivek to introduce his new general manager. I'm not sure exactly why that is. I mean, people can speculate on why he wasn't there. Maybe there's reasons for that that we're just not privy to. Or maybe he just didn't want to have to field questions from the media. That's also perfectly possible. Either one of those, I guess, is fair. I think Kings fans would like to hear from their owner at some point here soon, after everything that's gone on. New general manager, new head coach, interim head coach, firing Mike Brown, all these things. But, I'm just not sure he wants to speak to the media. So, no Vivek Ranadive, but on to the Scott Perry stuff and, what Scott really had to say. I think a question on a lot of fans' minds and just people who follow the Kings in general is, where is this organization heading specifically as it pertains to the roster this offseason? Are we expecting a lot of trades, kind of push the organization in more of a rebuild type of direction? And so I asked Scott that, and here's what Scott had to say about the possibility for a rebuild.
Hey Scott, Jeremiah Salmonson here, Sports Area Service. Welcome back to Sacramento. Mm-hmm. I know you just got here, obviously, but when you look at this roster from afar, I'm sure you've been keeping up with it. Do you see more of tweaks you want to make, or do you see kind of a large overhaul coming for you?
Like I just mentioned there, I'm going to be opportunistic and prudent in doing this. I'm learning all the players just like they're getting to learn me, and I'm going to spend a lot of time with a number of them this summer, and just make sure that we're equally aligned about where we're headed, because I'm going to be steadfast in my resolve in getting to where we need to get. And again, I want to make sure that they're in tune and in line, and that they want to be on board with that. So that's what I would tell you right now. There's some good talent here. I've had an excellent reception from all the players thus far. I've talked to every single one of them, and they all seem very positive and ready to go. They like the community here. Obviously I'm sure there was frustration that the season ended the way it did, but I'd be disappointed if they weren't frustrated. That's part of it.
So from there, you're not really getting everything that you might want from Scott initially, just in terms of like an instant kind of push in direction. But he was really clear about, what he's looking for in a head coach. He was asked by some members of the media, what he's looking for in terms of a head coach. And and what he wants to see in terms of and does Doug Christie possess some of those qualities. And he really just talked about, defensive mindset, accountability. He wants accountability from a new head coach and to push those values onto the players. And he wants a guy, I think, that is willing to do what it needs to take to push this team in the right direction. And that might be Doug Christie. That might not be Doug Christie. He said pointedly when, Tony Harvey asked him a question, just clarifying like, hey, you're not going to be announcing Doug, right? And he said, yes, correct. I'm not going to be announcing Doug Christie as my head coach yet, at least. That doesn't mean he won't get the job, but he's absolutely saying that Doug does not have the job right now and that he wants to make this decision in the next week or so. So very interesting stuff coming from Scott Perry in his introductory press conference. But just going back to what I said a moment ago, I think it was all kind of under the guise of a cool, calm, collected Scott Perry, who had his wife there, had members of the Kings' current basketball operations like Alvin Gentry, guys like that were sitting there. Mason Jones came in and watched what Scott had to say in his press conference. I didn't see any other players. There might have been some in the back, but I did not see any. But just very much a feeling of an adult in the room type situation, And for so long with the Kings front office and, going back and forth and who's making the decisions and not really knowing, what's coming from who's deciding this, who's deciding that. Is this coming from Vivek? Is this coming from Monty? Is this a West decision? Just not a lot of clarity from the front office. I don't think we're going to see a lot of that with Scott. I think Scott is going to be very upfront with the media as well as, maybe as well as online. His public persona, I think, is going to be very evident that he's making the decisions and that he is calling the shots. And I think if that ever changes, I'm not sure if Scott will stick around. But he was outright asked if, he's going to be making these critical decisions or if Vivek is going to kind of be in his ear telling him what he wants done. And Scott said right out that, no, Vivek has given him the leeway and the resources to make these decisions for the Sacramento Kings. So personally, I think it's a good hire. I am excited to see what Scott does at the beginning of his tenure here in Sacramento. Obviously, he has a lot of roster issues he needs to address. You've got 3 stars, DeMar DeRozan, Domas Sabonis, and Zach LaVine. You have to figure out if that can work together. And, Scott even himself has said that in the past that Zach does not really contribute to winning. And he even addressed those comments in the presser saying that, nothing is personal and it was on a podcast, and he didn't really back down from the comments, but he said he wanted to see how he could build around LaVine to make him more successful and to give him more chances in the postseason. So I think it's going to be interesting how that plans out. Obviously his comments about Zach are definitely on the record about how he doesn't think he contributes to winning much. And he didn't really back down from those, but he did clarify, about it not being personal and things of that nature. So it's going to be really interesting to see how he starts off his tenure in Sacramento, if there's big movement, when the free agency market opens and when he can, after the NBA playoffs. But it's going to be interesting to see how Scott handles his initial few months here in Sacramento. And, I think I'm optimistic with the new voice in the front office to see how this organization can move forward. We'll be back with more updates. Thanks for watching.